Welcome to What You Daein, the podcast. I'm Wilma McDaniel, and our plan really with this series of podcasts is to share with you our over 60 years between us of growing businesses, and our intention is to bring in some great guests who, give a different perspective and some of the insights, some of the lessons we've learned, some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, and really to share that with you as our audience so that hopefully you can learn from some of our mistakes, celebrate some of your successes, and really enjoy the whole experience of growing business. So I'm delighted to be joined today by my fellow director of Rise Business Growth for the past year, but more importantly, my husband of 31 years. So Frank, over to you.
Thank you, Wilma. So I'm Frank McDaniel, the director of Rise for a year, as Wilma said. So I think one of the things that Wilma wanted me to discuss was my experience in the data side of the business that we have now. So a long time ago in the 80s, I got into the computer industry just really where it was kicking off. And it was a great thing to do at the time. A bit scary because you didn't really know what was happening. But I got involved with a training company where we were doing things like Lotus 123 and programming and COBOL.
Remember Lotus 123?
Yeah, all the kind of old and great stuff at the time that was that was available. And I then moved on to a little company, as they were then, called Computer Centre, who are obviously, billions and global organisation now, and had some great years there. And I worked in Scotland initially, and then I moved down to London in the late 80s. That's why the grey hair's here, clearly. So, or it's 30 odd years of marriage, I don't know. But
we'll leave that there.
Yeah, exactly. But the late 80s in London was booming at the time. A lot of the Thatcher years there. So there was a lot of things going on. And a lot of spending being done by a lot of the large organisations.
Did Del Boy not call it the yuppie era?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was the red braces and stuff. Clearly, I never had any of those, but being from Glasgow, that wouldn't have went down too well. But it was a good time to be in that environment when you were a young guy trying to make your way in the industry. So I was in London for 3-4 years, moved back in the early 90s, and I'd kind of worked for a training company in computing, and then I'd worked for a reseller in the computing side, and I came back and joined a manufacturer, which again was another side of the business that was great. And I worked for a few manufacturers then, and they were kind of smaller manufacturers at the time. And then I got a break to move to one of the largest organisations in Hewlett-Packard. And I was there for a time and kind of came up the ranks in there, worked with a lot of the banks and large insurance companies. And then I got promoted to run Scotland. So at that time, in the early 90s, running a $50 million business was quite big. So I had a good time there and kind of moved into the management side, which was great. So, and then just following on from there, backup and recovery was the big thing in the industry that was happening. So I moved to a backup company, and I was there for 3-4 years. And then I moved to NetApp, where we're a data management software and storage business, and I was there for 15 years before I left and joined Rise. And that 15 years was kind of made up of working in Scotland for a while, and then the last 4 years I was running some large global accounts in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So, and these are, majority of them are oil and gas accounts, but I had a couple of accounts in Asia Pac, and had a large pharmaceutical company in the UK and Europe. So a fair spread of my some of the stuff that I've done, and yeah, now I'm with Rise.
And when we think back over those over 30 years and when tech was really in its infancy and how much you've learnt in that time, and I think about the number of Friday night dinners we've had as a with the family around the table, and literally what you Daein was the topic, and so I know snippets of most of what you've just described, but actually now working together, we're really getting into the heart of it. And as you know, my journey of Rise over the past 9 years or so has really evolved, and I've found this niche within technology in the spaces where I had my sector experience, which was really beauty, personal care, and a little bit 7 years of my 27 years prior to Rise was actually in fashion, as you know.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
So Rise was, you were instrumental really in me starting Rise, because I remember, I had been employed for 27 years, 20 of those in beauty and personal care, 7, as I said, in fashion and apparel. And you made me take 3 months out because consultancy and going into other people's business was not really something I had ever considered. But what I had been involved in my last role as commercial vice president EMEA, running a $100 million business, was a global review of the fashion space, which was supported by the Boston Consultant Group. So I had done that in my last sort of 2 or 3 years employed. So I had been exposed to consultancy, but it wasn't really something that I'd considered for me. But because you made me take 3 months out and promised not to take another job to consider what I was doing, our good friend Wilma Tucker at Right Management put me on a self-employed course. And I went on to that course, and it really makes me think about how pivotal that day was, because I went on this course with this hilarious guy. His name was Finlay Fountain, I remember it well. And he said, you're here, you've been in big corporate roles. The chances are you might be made redundant again, so you should give it a wee go. So literally I came home, changed my LinkedIn profile to Business Growth Advisor, and within a week I was on a call through a global network, chatting to 2 guys in Germany who were part of one of the big 4 financial institutions. And I was talking to them about trends in the marketplace, and they paid me. And I thought, gosh, I've got to look into this a bit more. And it was really through that journey that I was first introduced to places like Scottish Enterprise, Business Gateway, and started to build a network here in Scotland, because unlike you, I hadn't really spent a lot of time working in Scotland. I had spent way too much of my life, particularly in beauty and personal care, on a plane to London or on a plane to New York or something like that, because of the global companies or European companies that I was working with during that 20 years. And, and as you know, Frank, a huge part of the coming out of beauty and personal care and going into fashion and apparel was to be based in Scotland for those crucial years of our boys' education. Yep. I remember the holiday, because we always said what you Daein when we were on holiday. Yep. And I remember vividly the holiday, we were in Aliva and you were joining NetApp. So we weren't moving south. And I said, okay, now the time has come to stop going to London every Monday morning and sort of fighting to come home at some point. And, that's a decision for me personally that I'll never, ever regret. Being at those parents' night, being at those assemblies, being at those open days at the college, at the universities, those are priceless moments that I was able to do because I was based in Scotland. And that was a really interesting thing to come out of something that I knew and loved for 20 years. And you might remember, do you remember the repotting story?
Yes. Yep.
How sick of the repotting story did you get? Because I was basically stepping out of something I'd been in for 20 years to go into something else, and I kind of had to explain it to people from a business side. I mean, the real reasons were, and the people who know and love me knew, it was I wanted to be based in Scotland. So to get a job with a clothing manufacturer based initially in Livingston and latterly in Strathclyde Business Park was a dream come true, challenging though it was. But I used the term repotting when I was talking to people who were questioning me, why are you leaving something that you're so good at and that you know and love and where you've had all this success? And I see a lot of that now with the businesses that we work with, because actually to grow a business, you got to repot, you got to challenge the status quo. There's got to be some growing pains. And in my 9 years with Rise, that's what I experienced. I pull on those lessons learned. You know, I vividly remember my first year at Russell driving home saying, you wanted to grow, you wanted to repot. Not that the skills that I had, the commercial skills that I had were very transferable, but the culture was so different. You know, I'd come from this very commercial culture into much more of a manufacturing and operational culture, whereas you've really done the whole picture as you were describing. I mean, if you look at some of your pivotal moves, the one that I remember most from the Friday night What You Daein dinners is HP, because I remember you came home to Scotland when we were getting married, because you had this offer to join a manufacturer. So it made sense for us to keep our base in Scotland, or for you to come home to Scotland, rather than for me to move to London, is what we had looked at initially. But I remember Hewlett Packard was a wee bit like my Estee Lauder. It was that company that you really admired, and that you wanted to have that experience. And describe some of that journey, because that was enormous growth for you, which it did bring huge challenges. Describe some of that.
Yeah, I mean, it was they were a company who were a global player, and you know, they were. I knew quite a few people there. I'd sold a lot of their products when I was at Computer Centre, and they were an industry leader in a lot of product areas. And this was days of really sort of personal computers, and obviously HP are well known for their printers. But the organisation itself was massive, and working with some of the bigger companies, the banks and the insurance companies in Scotland was huge. And you know, and I think that then opening into this massive global organisation was because the other manufacturers I'd worked for were big, but they were nowhere in the massive billions that the HP were. So the culture was it was actually a brilliant culture at HP, and very similar to when I joined NetApp, and that was one of the drivers for joining NetApp, because the culture was very much the same. It was all about, you know, looking after customers, but more importantly, looking after your colleagues, and everyone was together doing the same thing. So it was a big move, and I quickly progressed through there into the management side, and I wasn't sure if I was cut out for management, but it was just a natural step for me. I was obviously doing pretty well, and they could see something in me that maybe I didn't at the time. I was obviously too young at the time, so I thought I was anyway. But anyway, it was the right move to make, because it you know, exposes you to the senior management within a massive organisation, and some of the politics and stuff that go on above, beyond what's happening. Yeah. So it was a great move for me to go there. And as I'm saying, it just develops you a bit more as a person, and
I think that's the huge thing, because I think for growth, you have to step out of your comfort zone, whether it's as an individual or as a collective, as a team, or as a business, no matter what size that business is. You know, I look back and I often talk now about Rise. You know, the beginning of Rise 9 years ago as, in fact, I mentioned this yesterday when I was with a client. I talk about 9 years ago as my stepping out the boat moment. So I was really stepping out of, obviously I was stepping out of an employed role. I was stepping out of my comfort zone. I was really putting myself out there as opposed to putting out the brands and the organisations that I had worked with. But now, 9 years on, I'm so glad I did, because of how I've grown and we've grown over that time, because it is by that stepping out of your comfort zone that you learn and you do grow. So whether it's repotting or step out the boat,
you've got a few of these interesting bits to bring in.
But I think when I look back,
well, I think as the industry changes, whether it's whether it's the kind of IT sort of data side, consultancy side, or whatever, and I think things have really changed a bit now with the digital era coming in, and what you're finding is a lot of businesses now, particularly after COVID, where everybody thought, you go to an office 9 to 5, or you fly around the world, or you do
true.
whatever. And we always knew that AI and digitalisation was coming in, because obviously I'm in that data side of the business. But you were seeing lots of businesses, and we have seen it already this year within some of the fashion and particularly the beauty industry. It is so difficult for a massive organisation to turn that around very quickly. But other companies have done it, and a lot of startup companies have done fantastically well because they're very agile in what they do. So but people had to move quickly to that after COVID, when people started going back to work, and it was like, and even now it's still flexible working, whether a big office, will be fully, full at any time. I just can't see, because the organisations that I'm talking to at the minute are all sort of co-working, and they're really trying to be a bit more efficient. And the great thing about the technology side is, when the cloud technology came in, it made things a bit more agile for people to move things quickly.
Yeah.
So
and I'm glad you've mentioned
it's a difficult stage for some organisations, and
Absolutely.
some of them have adapted quicker than others.
Absolutely.
And I think some of the research that we've looked at, you've seen the travel industry, for example, who have, you don't do anything except you do it online. You get an online ticket, you get online information through. So everything's, the only problem is when the system's down, then you're kind of stuffed. So always said technology is fantastic, but it has to be up all the time.
Absolutely.
Because we rely on it so much.
Absolutely.
So there's still some challenges out there for organisations, but there's some companies that can take you there, and show you the correct way to move forward.
Yeah. I mean, I think the research that you've mentioned is the research that we saw at the Digital Beauty Conference in Barcelona a couple of months ago. Yeah. And it was actually a great slide that I captured, which was really looking at the digitalisation curve by sector. So you're right up there was things like travel. Banking was a bit further down because, there was regulatory changes that prevented some of the digitalisation that we're seeing now in banking happen. And chemical industry, of which beauty and personal care is such a huge part, was even behind banking in terms of digitalisation. And as you know, this is something I studied in my programme that I did last year with the Side Business School, University of Oxford, was really looking at sectors and how ready those sectors are for the new era of doing business. And at that time, the numbers, beauty and personal care is a $500 billion space. And at that, prior to the pandemic, 85% of those sales globally happened in some kind of bricks and mortar. So you're right. People had to pivot, and we looked in that programme as how do the incumbents respond. So, if you're a large multi-brand player like an Estee or a L'Oreal or an LVMH, how do you defend that market share? But equally, if you're a challenger and you're coming in, there's never been a better time to create that joined up type experience that ultimately the consumer is getting from other sectors, travel, fashion, and so for beauty and personal care, it's a massive opportunity to catch up. And I know, Frank, from the work that you're doing you mentioned agility, and from the work that you're doing for example, with Data Vita. Tell us a little bit about Data Vita, because I am fascinated by this.
Yeah, I mean, Data Vita have, they've got the only tier 3 data centre. They've actually just opened another data centre in Scotland.
Sorry, let me interrupt you there. What does tier 3 mean?
So tier 3 means that you have massive, 100% up, pretty much guaranteed. It has, and that's from whether you put half a rack in or you put in a full. I mean, there's full space there that you could put your whole business in if you really want to. But yeah, it's the first facility that's certified for pretty much. And I don't want to go into all these PUE ratings because it gets a bit too technical. But it's 100% uptime for SLAs, and you can scale up, scale down very quickly. So it's probably a discussion, a real technical discussion for another podcast.
Sure.
Which I'm hoping that we'll arrange. But it's given companies, for example, there's data centres everywhere. But in Scotland, because of the weather that we get here and the cold and whatever else, there's for emissions, and everyone should be committed to looking at making things a bit greener. We know it. Yeah. We know it's all there, and everybody keeps talking this big story.
Journey to net zero type stuff.
A lot of people aren't particularly doing it. In Scotland, you get 11 to 1 savings. It's the highest anywhere in the UK. So 11 to 1 savings
from an environmental point of view. 11 to 1.
Absolutely. So people should be, they're saying they're looking at all this stuff, but clearly I've found with talking to organisations, they have these sustainability groups, but there's no one actually taking responsibility to move to and get some of the savings. However, we've had some real success with some of the local councils who are clearly looking at this, and one particular local council was ready to upgrade their data centre because some of these data centres are really old. They've got a lot of legacy systems in there, and they're having to manage these systems all the time, every day. And these are costly because there might be one person trained on what this application does, but they can't switch it off because it's so important to not council tax, but some old, part and fines or whatever it may be, something that creates revenue for the council. But this particular council were ready to spend $5 million upgrading their data centre. After we spoken to them and went through various options with them, they moved some of their business into Data Vita. They didn't need to spend the $5 million, and they started seeing savings up to 98%. So these are real numbers, and there's real case studies on these. So, again, I don't want to get too technical into this because
as you say, we can cover that in a further episode.
I think we want to cover it another time.
But I see that such synergy with that in terms of some of what I'm seeing in digitalisation within my space. As you know, we were out, as I mentioned earlier, in Barcelona at the Digital Beauty Conference, and that evening I attended the Digital Beauty Awards, and one of my projects that I'm working on, ActiMirror, won an award for the most innovation in physical retail, because actually it's joining up the customer experience from shopping in store to what happens when you go home with product. Yeah. Which ultimately is where we're going to see, better customer relationships, better results from the formulations that customers are using, and ultimately lifetime value and relationship between the consumer and the brand. And that particular example that won the award is now in 25 El Corte Inglés across Spain. And yet I'm working with brands here in the UK where the retail landscape has so changed. It's like, where do I put my focus? Customer acquisition digitally is so expensive. but yeah, I can't get listed because retail space has reduced across the UK. Where do I play? And that's where I think our joint experience can add massive value, because I remember being in a particular store in Liverpool a few weeks ago, and you challenged the lovely beauty advisor. So this is not joined up, and it's kind of almost unbelievable that the customer experience is not joined up. But that's exactly what we're looking at in this digitalisation journey when we compare something like travel to something like personal care.
Yeah, look, you need, there's going to be, and we've seen it already, there's some disruptors in the market just now, and these guys are going to get there quicker than if the other companies don't change. Yeah, it's an absolute fact that we're not going back the way we're going forward. And it's great to go into a store, as we experienced, and you buy some product, and it's like, okay, so how do you then market that? And it's like, well, I've got your details. Yeah, but how do you then market it? How do you, is this data that you've got on your personal details, what happens when I run out of product? Do I call you, or how do you know? Whereas that should be automated and automatic.
100%.
And it's that should just happen. Now, Actimirror could be a bit of a game changer because there's nothing like it in the UK. It's disrupted some stuff in Asia, as we know.
Absolutely.
And so there's going to be disruptive technologies coming in that people are not going to be. They're not going to wait now. They still like the experience in the store. Yeah. However, if they know that they're going to run out of product in 2 days' time, they're going to order it online. Yeah. And that should just be automatic. Well, but they're still going to go out on a Saturday afternoon and go into a store and go out for lunch with their friends and go and buy something. Yes. Right? That's just a woman's prerogative. It happens all the time.
maybe a men's prerogative increasingly too.
Yeah, maybe. But generally, it's the other way around. But it is, there's but this bit just needs joined up, and I think it's going to get there. The problem is, it's certainly for the larger organisations, it's going to take some time to plan and get done. But listen, you see all the jobs in the market just now. It's if you've got digital in front of your name, I think it's an extra 10 grand in your salary or something. So it's everybody's called digital something now. But it's how do they get there? And one of the things that Data Vita does really well is they can be a bridging gap to move stuff as well. So you can move stuff to Data Vita, do whatever upgrades that you need to do, and then move it back. Yeah. Or you can. So there's the flexibility and the agility that you do that from the data point of view. The biggest problem is that it's just a lot of this stuff is just not joined up yet. Yeah. And so that's where the opportunity is. And that's where the opportunity is for some of the disruptives coming into the market. Absolutely.
And I think it's massive, Frank, that we can learn for the sectors like banking that was behind because of some of the legal restrictions in banking. But certainly for something like the chemistry or chemical or the beauty personal care industry, I think there's so much potential to learn. What I've found is I'm always looking at it from a customer experience point of view, because that's who I am. That's where I spent my life, looking at, what happens when the consumer, pre-digital, what happens when the consumer walks through the door, the customer walks through the door, how are they greeted, how are they introduced to the brand. You'll remember me doing file cards and it's that data that I was doing in file cards and encouraging the teams to build data on file card boxes 30 years ago. It's that local approach, but in a global context, that I think's so exciting. And as you know, I was.
But how far on are they from? I'm not having a go at the beauty industry, but how far off are they? Because it was those cards. I remember when you started, and then where has it moved to?
Well, the cards disappeared because of GDPR, and now. Now if you are to join up the system, so for example, if we take Actimirror as an example, you mentioned Asia. So Actimirror is now supporting Shiseido, major player in Asia, a very, very large, over 100-year-old respected Japanese, make incredible luxury beauty formulations. They are now gathering data from the Actimirror platform at the point of sale and taking that back into their office and looking at all parameters, without breaking confidences, but understanding what's the consumer's relationship with that brand and that product. And that's how we have to join this up, because I go back to the event we did a couple of months ago with Sook and Pool and Shoreditch, when we were looking at what does this new era in beauty look like. And Chris from Pool presented some great market research, particularly on the UK market, looking at what does a customer want to do. And you're right, the customer wants to still go and play. Beauty is, it wasn't at the front door of every department store in the UK by chance. Consumers want to have that fun. They want to have that experience. You sit down, you're maybe given a glass of champagne. Somebody teaches you how to look great. It's a great experience. Why would you not want to have that? And every generation, as Chris presented, still wants to have that physical experience. What they don't want to have is they don't want to need to go to the store every time they need another product, or they want to try something different. So it's joining that up. So whether they are standing in a luxury department store in any city in the UK, or they're sitting, on their phone one night and they want to top up something, or they want to try something differently. And now the tech is there for us to bring what was the success of understanding a consumer 30 years ago in file cards into an infrastructure that really allows that seamless journey. Because the thing is with the health and beauty is a continuous journey as we age. Our skin is a dynamic living organ that's so unique to us, we can be measured by our fingerprint. So therefore, to not take the opportunity to join some of those experiences up so that you can have, as a consumer, the best experience. So as a brand, you can provide the best experience. Why would you not do it?
Well, no, exactly. But, the thing is, if you're sitting in Portugal, for example, and you need some more product, you should be able to just order that.
Absolutely.
So, we done some work when we were on holiday there, and, and you can do these things now. It doesn't matter where you are.
Yeah,
as long as what systems or what products you're buying are joined up and they know what you want.
Yeah.
Either that or you're still doing this shopping basket thing.
Yeah.
Whereas you should have everybody's data there, and particularly with Actimirror, for example, we've seen in Valencia that, everything they've done, and it's all done, dynamically there. Tells you where your skin is, what you need, and they'll recommend whatever products. And generally what happened was people would say, I'm not buying 4 products because it might not work. I know I'm looking in this mirror and it's giving me this information, but... But what Monica was saying, the consultant, was that generally people buy the 2 products that they recommend, and then 7 days later they'll buy the other 2.
Well, that's amazing.
Because they can actually see the changes that are happening to the skin.
Absolutely.
And then they'll maybe come back in again and do the mirror again and see that you've went from 80% now to 85%, for example. And they say, if we use these other products because this part of my skin's a bit drier than this part.
Gosh, you're getting good at this. You're getting very, very good at this.
So you don't think I listen, don't you? You don't think I listen. And by the way, you're right enough, it is for men as well, because,
what was your skin score in El Corte Inglés Valencia?
84.
84.
And if it's high on 70, you're pretty good. Allegedly. Just don't quote me on that.
So those 31 years of skincare advice, my boy, have paid off.
Yeah.
Excellent. No, I think what we're describing here, whether it's Hewlett Packard, whether it's Estee Lauder, whether it's Actimirror, whether it's Data Vita, we're discussing challenging the status quo, and that's what growth is all about. That's essentially what we're doing as Rise. And yes, I've spent 9 years doing this, and I go into organisations and And often people say they want to change, but actually, they want to grow. But as I said earlier, if you're going to grow, something has to change. And when we get into that sort of growth, when the honeymoon period's over and we get into that, okay, what are we doing differently, guys? How are we uniting as a team? How are we going to go on this new path together? That's where it can get challenging. And I've seen firsthand, I mentioned earlier the 6 months I did with BCG. I've seen firsthand how challenged people can be when what they've always done is being questioned or is being reviewed or, is being considered for change. I've seen that firsthand. And I talk about it in Rise as, we can together work out what the promised land over there looks like. We can sit around the table, we can work it out, but ultimately it's going to take that first step of doing something different to get towards that new place. And this is again one of the things that I looked at in my 3 months working with the team at the Side Business School at Oxford, was looking at examples of stepping out of the comfort zone. We looked at small businesses, but we looked at some big global examples of platform scale up, things like Netflix, things like Uber. And what can we, even if we're a small business in Scotland today, what can we learn from that so that we can get on that journey of growth, and enjoy the journey and have fun in the journey, because it's hard.
Yeah, because people don't want to change.
No.
It's
not in our nature to change.
But listen, if people don't change, there is too much disruptive technology out there that is going to either force them to change or they're going to lose it.
Yeah.
And that's happening. And there's a lot of enemies out there as well, and from the data side with cybersecurity and everything.
Yeah.
And people are getting hacked and attacked every single day.
You're so right, Frank. One of the examples that I remember vividly from my programme with the Oxford University was the example of the chief exec of Nokia. Nokia was the go-to phone. Who didn't have a Nokia phone? Everyone. And he stood up in public and said, "We have nothing to worry about. Apple are a niche player." And that's the danger of thinking you're too big to fail. So,
yeah, you're not.
And yet, from a startup's SME scale-up point of view, there's never been a better time to challenge some of that status quo and actually be part of this new world that we're all walking into.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much for being with us. It's been a real pleasure, and hopefully you can join us again soon for some more business insights on What You Daein.